Hey, what's good, creators? Happy New Year. Great to see you in 2022. So this year I wanted to start off with the Canon M50. And I see a lot of content of people recommending the Canon M50 in 2022, which I 100% agree, but there are two major points that I want to discuss with you today if you're still looking at the M50. Now, is the M50 the right camera for you? So let's address the first obvious question. M50 Mark 1, Mark 2, is it worth getting the Mark II brand new? I would say it's a no-brainer. $50 difference, spend the money. You get the improved autofocus, which now tracks the eyes. Previously it was just the face. So, and this is important for someone like me where I do a lot of portrait photography, portrait videos, a lot of people photos. So the autofocus is super important for someone like myself. Secondly, I like to use my cameras as a webcam. Now, one of the issues was that it didn't have a clean HDMI. And what that means is that, when you plug it in via HDMI, you see all the little, icons that you see on your screen, like the ISO, aperture, your white balance. You can't get rid of it. Now, you can buy a fairly cheap capture card, and that's what I ended up doing. It cost me like $30 or whatever it was to get that clean HDMI feed. But now it's built into the MKii, and you don't have to worry about purchasing anything extra. And of course, the ability to record in vertical format for those of you who like to, do TikTok and Instagram Reels, that type of thing. That can be very handy for some of you. Now, otherwise, the differences between the two cameras, there really isn't none. They're the same. So some quick pros and cons before we get into, the 2 or 3 main points that I have prepared for you is considering the price, it's still fairly affordable, brand new. If you're really strapped on your budget, I would recommend the MK1. If you can find refurbished deals on Canon's website or even on Amazon, I've seen them between $400 to $500 with the kit lens. It's a pretty good price. Image quality, color rendition, still top of the line. You're gonna get great images, especially if you just want to do photography. The M50 is a great camera for photography, coupled with a great lens like let's say a Sigma 30mm 1.4, which I'm gonna purchase very soon. You can get some really great results with that combination. Now, if you're an easy peasy type of person, you don't really care for all the tech and all the little intricacies of tech, and you want a glorified point and shoot camera with the ability to change lenses, this is still a great camera for you. A few cons that I want to bring up so that you're aware of it. One of the obvious ones that everybody talks about is the 4K limitations. For one, when you use 4K on the M50, you lose that great autofocus system. It reverts to what's called a contrast-based autofocus. And for the most part, it's not very stable and it's not very accurate. I wouldn't say it's unusable, but with the autofocus, it's not very reliable. The other thing about the 4K is that the camera will crop in even more. So APS-C cameras in general, like the M50, have a 1.5 or 1.6 crop. And basically all that is that if your sensor is this big, full frame, let's say this is the full frame, a cropped APS-C camera like the M50 is only like this, right? So you lose some of that quality of the sensor. But what happens in 4K is that this section becomes even more cropped, because I think the crop is like 2.5 or 2.6 total. So this could be an advantage if you're a wildlife videographer and you want to extend your zoom range just a little bit more. But for someone who's a vlogger or talking head video type of person, you'll be very limited on what you can do with your 4K on the M50. And then another con that I've run into is the battery life. Now, in the beginning, with a new battery, you can get up to 2 hours, realistically hour and a half hour 45 if you're shooting video all day, or even a hybrid shooter like I am. It's a scary feeling to, see that flashing battery icon, because when you see that flash, you really only have like 5 or 10 minutes before it's dead. And this was probably one of my biggest gripes about the M50. The battery life is atrocious. It's blah. And of course, as I mentioned before, the limitations of the recording limits. I don't know how many times I've recorded videos either for YouTube or for another project, and I'm talking away and then I see that recording limit, and I just shake my head every time. So now, with that being said, there are two main factors that I want to touch base on, because a lot of the content creators still recommend the Canon M50 in 2022, which again, I 100% agree, but they failed to mention the system as a whole. You gotta think that when you purchase a camera, you're buying into a system. It's not just the camera, it's the lenses and the accessories. Currently, the M Mount lens system is uncertain. Now, there's been a lot of rumors that there would be a successor for the M6, which is like the next level up from the M50. There was rumors of there being an M7, but we haven't heard anything about that recently. Then there's the limitations of what lenses are available. So Canon has their own branded M Mount lenses, as well as Sigma and some other third-party companies. But the selection is still kind of limited. Mind you, there are enough lenses out there that you can choose from that will work very well. And your other option is purchasing an adapter, which is an M mount to EF or EFS mount, like from Viltrox, Comlite, or Canon's own adapter, where you can use EF or EFS mount lenses, which is what I do. Now, I'm going to talk about this more later on, but one of the reasons why I switched to Sony was that it had one mount, and that's the E mount system. For me, I had a choice between the EOS R and the Sony A7C, as they were similarly priced. But the EOS R is a few years old. The A7C just came out a year or two ago, and it's more modern, it's got more of the recent technology, and not having to use an adapter to use other lenses was kind of a no-brainer for me. So before you spend your hard-earned cash on the M system, I want you to think about what your intentions are in terms of your upgrade path. Do you want to go full frame? Do you want to upgrade your body after 3 to 5 years? Because really, you should be spending money on lenses and not the camera bodies. The camera bodies, you'll go through every few years or so, but it's the lenses that make the difference. But with Canon, they've got EF, EFS, M mount, RF. These three eventually will be discontinued. Why do they make it so hard? Why do they make it so complicated? And it's kind of like they're just figuring things out as they go. Whereas Sony is just like, one mount makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, simple. So for me, when I made this decision, that was kind of my deciding factor why I went to Sony in terms of upgrading. Now, the second point may not be important to you, and it wasn't for me a few years ago, and that's the issue of 4K. Now, yes, 4K is becoming a bit more mainstream now. Most people still have 1080p monitors, or they're viewing things on mobile devices or tablets, so 1080p is more than enough. However, because of the limitations of the 4K on the M50, it's really hard for me to recommend it for video. The latest iPhones shoot great 4K and blows the M50 away. And it has great autofocus, So with the crop factor that we talked about and the strict limitations of 4K on the M50, it's a really big turnoff for someone like me if I was purchasing today. If I look at stats on my YouTube channel, 46% of you watch on a desktop or laptop, and 45% of you watch on mobile devices. So in my case, 4K isn't as important for YouTube videos, but it is important to me for the projects I do outside. Because I kid you not, the quality of 4K is distinguishable between 1080p, and most people say no, mobile, you can't see. You can see the difference. Now that I've had the A7C and I've recorded both in 4K and 1080p, the 1080p on the Sony A7C and the Canon M50 are comparable. They're both very good. Very hard to tell the difference. But when I crank that to 4K and I compare it to 1080p, it's just crispier, if I can use that word. Not necessarily sharp, it's just the clarity, the color rendition. It's just more detailed, and it does matter to someone like myself now, whether people are watching on mobile or desktop. So you want to have the best quality possible for your money. And the M50 doesn't give me that in terms of 4K, unless I manually focus and consider the crop and all that stuff we just talked about. So in 2022, a camera that can't do 4K and have good autofocus is really hard for me to recommend, because I'm considering people that spend money, they're going to want to use this camera for 4 or 5 or more years. And by that point, 4K is going to be standard in most cases. So the question is, would I still recommend the Canon M50 Mark 1 or 2? My immediate answer first is yes, with some hesitations based on what we just talked about. Instead, what I would recommend for $100 more, if you can stretch your budget, the Sony ZV-E10, which just came out not too long ago, is a much better investment down the road. So as of today on B&H, it's like $798, $799, something like that. And it's got no recording limit, 4K and 24 frames per second, slight crop if you record in 30 frames per second, 120 FPS full HD, which the M50 can't do. It only does 720p. Like, who records in 720p now? Like, do we even watch videos on 720p now? Like, why is that even there? And most importantly, it uses the M Mount system for lenses. I'm curious, let me know if you are a current Canon M50 user and what your thoughts are on the future of the M Mount system. Let me know in the comments below, and let me know if this has kind of helped you decide which way to go. So again, guys, Happy New Year. I'm stoked to share with you a lot of the content I've been planning for this year. Just get out there, hit record, create, and I'll see you when I see you.